Introduction. I'm from Infosys. We have a fledgling marketing and legal department. So let me do a little bit of marketing on that front. Something on my own profile. I think she's read out most of it, so I'll just skip through. I'm going to talk largely from experience in terms of what we have done at Infosys. So I'll bring a lot of the SI perspective here. From the questions, right, I mean, try to get what you are looking for from this as I go through. And offline, I'm available after the session as well. So if you have specific questions, please, feel free to ask them towards the end and maybe during the breaks and all of that. So like I said, I'll try and cover the SI perspective. So look at the logos here, and there is something that is common with these companies, and in fact, we can fill up the slide with many more as we go along, right? Each one of these companies began to do something that was disruptive in the initial stages, and now obviously a lot of these things are, from a convergence standpoint, more mainstream or becoming mainstream. But each one of these companies began to do things early on, and we all were sort of watching it from the sidelines to start with, and then we all began to adopt some of these practices. And for us, the journey started with being an observer, and then gradually beginning to really adopt some of these practices and then making them mainstream as we speak. So personally for me, and I have sort of put up these points more from my own individual experience perspective, the first part which really led to this convergence where speed, cost, quality, the whole triad that we look at, began to get sort of disrupted in some ways, was when the teams began to move from being small groups of 4 or 5 people or 7 people, really adopting agile practices, to much larger groups of people where 100 people, 50 people, 70 people teams began to actually take their journeys onto agile in a much more streamlined fashion. So that was the first point of convergence. The second, and in fact this started with the likes of Amazon, where they started doing a large number of deployments in a very short period of time. So there was a very seminal presentation on how Amazon started doing 10 deployments per day. So for many of us, that was the starting point. A lot of people looked at it saying, why the heck do you have to do 10 deployments a day, right? And today, over the past 4 or 5 years, we look at it as something that is really mainstream. People look at this as ways of taking innovations to the market at a much rapid pace than with the traditional methodology. So that was the second real disruptive point. The third was what we began to do with the infra. I remember days when you required a server, and I remember waiting for actually 3 months. The server would come from Taiwan or Singapore, and you had to actually wait for 3 months to actually get the hardware in your room. From that time to today, where in our company, for instance, a developer can requisition a VM, and it's a self-service portal, and you get it within maybe half a minute or a minute, right? And now look back 4 or 5 years back, where you had to get that same capacity, request for it, get an approval, get the budgets in place, and you got it over a period of 3 months. So you have to wait 3 months. Today you have to wait probably 3 minutes. So that's another change that has happened. Second, now what do you do with that infra? A lot of the things that you have to physically do are today virtualized, and that's where the infra as code and all of those movements have really led to the other part of the convergence. For me personally, again, the whole idea of MVP, minimum viable product, that is very well elaborated by Eric in his book, The Lean Startup. That was another point where we began to look at product development in a very different sense, in a very different way, where breaking up features, breaking up things into more manageable chunks became mainstream. I think that was the other part of convergence that really happened. The whole aspect of continuous integration, there is a lot of tooling available today, and I'll cover some of it as we go along, was around the continuous integration part, as we began to do automated builds, integrate stuff quickly in a manner that could be done without a lot of human intervention. That was the other part. And then, of course, the whole cloud aspect, where you now had the ability to actually get infra, which was far more costlier in the past, and now you could get it for just about $1 or less I think that really led to a lot of the developments that have happened in the Agile and the DevOps world today. And a lot of things that today we take for granted are really an outcome of many of these convergences that have happened over the past few years. So let me briefly touch upon this aspect of speed, cost, and quality. And I mean, any one of us who has been in this for a while knows the aspect very well. There is a triad; they are all connected. If I try to improve quality, obviously I might have to compromise speed. Or if I want to keep both of them constant, I might be looking at increasing my cost. Now that is where I feel methodologies like DevOps really come into play, where they try to break this triad. They try to help you possibly improve all three of them or both of them without compromising the third factor. And for me personally, that is the real power of looking at methodologies like DevOps, where you can break this equation. And I think once you break this equation, then the limits are really something that you set for yourself. You can scale your operations, you can do n number of deployments per day, you can really begin to bring collaboration of a kind that your teams have not seen in the past. And a lot of it can be automated, a lot of it can be done in a manner that really sort of doesn't need human intervention at all as you go along. And I'm going to touch upon some of these aspects in our platform. Eddie talked about systems of engagement, systems of record. The other change that we began to see with our customers as the agile journeys for many of them, and we are partners to many of them in their agile journeys, was this distinction that they started to make with applications that we are managing for them. So the systems of engagement clearly stood out here. Now these were applications, these were systems where end customers were very active. These were systems which were frequently undergoing changes, and the frequency of change would range from something that you changed or delivered every month, every week, every few days, to the other systems which were systems of record. The customers were very clear. These are systems which are not going to change very often. These have to be treated differently. So the differential treatment that we began to give to applications which were more customer facing, more amenable to rapid changes, quick changes, which possibly delivered services or value to end customers, versus applications which were more for record keeping. These are backend systems. They don't need to change every week. They don't need to change every month. So the difference that you began to apply, the differential treatment that we began to give, was the other aspect which really led for us to accelerate our journey on DevOps. So for us, this really meant three fundamental principles. One, how do we bring a superior user experience? And this was again the difference that we saw with respect to systems of record and systems of engagement. Systems of engagement where the user wants to see additional value, incremental change that he or she is able to feel and touch either through a new feature or a new functionality that is implemented. Speed of delivery. Now this is important because eventually if we are looking at making a new feature or a new functionality available to the user every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, do you have your entire ecosystem, which is your ops teams, which is your test teams, which is your dev team, in sync? And not just this, but the other functions in the environment also. Several of our customers have taken the agile journey out of IT into the non-IT world also, because they felt if the procurement division doesn't really become agile and you have only the software development teams becoming agile, it really doesn't work. You have to have the entire organization really going together in this journey. So that was the other aspect where the speed of delivery, not just the development teams delivering their changes in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but the QA teams being able to actually automate tests and run them within a time span that makes that delivery possible. The ops team ready to actually take that entire dump and make a release into production. Right? So all of these have to go hand in hand, and therefore the speed of delivery becomes the other principle that you drive. Agility, I am using a capital A here and not a small a, and there is a difference in my view. So while a 5-member or a 7-member team finds it very easy to adopt these practices, the moment you bring aspects which are very relevant for an SI like us, you have distributed teams. So our own teams are spread across multiple cities and countries. You also have the customer who is maybe 5,000 miles away. And the customer in the first place has outsourced work to you because he doesn't want a lot of headache. And now you tell him, come on a daily stand-up. I'm going to ask you questions. You have to participate in the meeting and this and that. It needs a different way of dealing with all this. Technology plays a role. Your methodology, which has to be adopted to the situation, plays a role. And fundamentally, the practices that you apply on a 5-member team, when you try to apply them on a 50-member team, which is distributed, which is globally spread out, which it comprises of at times 3 or 4 different companies coming together, 3 or 4 different partners coming together from different companies, needs a completely different look at the methodology. So that's the agility part out there. So these 3 principles is what we took as our sort of guiding lights and started working on the platform. So before I get to the platform, right, and I know from morning you have been seeing various definitions of DevOps, and this is probably one more to the list. But I thought it's important that I, sort of flash it here, just maybe for a brief moment, because for me, really, it is, about culture and all the other things that have been spoken. But in the end, it is a method. It is a method. It is a methodology, right? And a methodology that allows us to communicate, allows us to collaborate, allows us to integrate different parts of the organization. Now, whether it is dev and QA and ops, whether it is your business analysts and your dev and your test teams or your ops teams, it will vary by the way you are structured, by the way your organization sort of functions. But fundamentally, the fact that it is a methodology, it is a way of doing things, it is a set of practices that will drive what you do and how you do, right? And second, the fact that it allows you to, or it sort of, makes it easy for us to communicate, to integrate, and to collaborate. I think this is something that I want to lay out again, and I know there is probably a repetition of that, but fundamentally, a methodology is the keyword, and the fact that it allows us to communicate better, integrate better, and collaborate better. I think that these are the keywords for me. And the whole idea of silos, and they get formed. I think we are all human, right? I head the test team, so I have my own way of driving it. Somebody heads the dev team, and there is an ops set of guys. They think differently. Now you can break it into many. I can have one more third piece in between, which is QA. You can have a more upstream piece, which is your analysts and the business teams and all of that. But fundamentally, what I am trying to say here is, the objectives for these teams tend to vary over a period of time. They don't start with that intent, but they begin to happen that way. And this is true across the board, across the industry. So the dev team, we all would like to believe that as developers, we are the creative lot, right? And we don't need a process, we don't need a methodology. Give us an idea and we will sort of transform it into something which the user can touch and feel. The ops teams actually have a very different way of looking at things. For them, the guiding principle is the process. There is a manual, there is a written down checklist, and they go by that, right? Largely, there is a rigor in what they do. Now, the idea of that methodology definition and the fact that how do you communicate, how do you integrate, and how do you collaborate is really about bringing both of these together in some ways. So the rigor of the ops teams, for instance, and the creativity of the dev teams have to come together. And only then the outcomes that we really seek, which is, can we deliver a set of features week after week to the customer, to the end customer, right? Can the customer actually see good quality stuff happening, at a consistent rate? And you may define your frequency. It could be 2 weeks for somebody, it could be 1 week, it could be few days for someone, right? So the idea really is to bring all of this together. So these disparate teams, they have different objectives, intents are correct, but over a period of time, the objectives sort of begin to differ. How do you bring them together? And for us, the answer to this was to really create a platform. So create a platform which brings all these processes, brings all these methodologies together, and in some ways implements it in a way which is touchless, which is scriptless. And that's what we did with our platform. So look at a typical continuous integration or a continuous delivery chain, and you find there are a bunch of overheads, and may not be overheads in the sense of dollars per se, but possibly in the sense of the effort. Right? Setup is a pain. Look at a development team of say 10 or 12 member kind of a situation, and each of those team members have to set up a bunch of tools that are required to do their work. Depending on how good, how bad, and how streamlined your IT function is, that could mean anywhere between few hours to few days, right? Look at the whole aspect of administration. You set up your own build server and whatnot, and then one of the guys from the team would actually sit and administer all of that, right? Then you will have somebody actually sitting and writing scripts. And then over a period of 3 months, you will find that those scripts are not relevant anymore. Somebody has to sit and change them. If you are lucky, the developer is still around. If you are unlucky, the developer has probably moved on into something else. He's moved on to another team. He's left the company, so on and so forth. So now who is going to maintain those scripts? And because they were scripts, that was not the real deliverable. It was not written very well. It did not have comments. It did not have documentation, none of that, right? So now you put another guy on it. He's going to sit and, reinvent the wheel, start all over again. And the first thing he's going to say is, this is all rubbish. Who wrote it? I don't understand head or tail of it, right? And you now bring in the process guys, right? The process guy is going to come and ask compliance. Are you compliant? Are you, your boss is going to ask for, are we on track for a 2-week cycle? Are we going to release every 2 weeks? Then, you have other pains, right? You are supposed to use tools. You are supposed to automate stuff. So this is the real challenge that every team in our industry faces. And I have listed few. I mean, I know each one of us can add 1 or 2 more to this, right? And our idea was to really take out all of this pain and make it so easy that it's something that people find absolutely frictionless to use. So what we did was really create something called, and because it was created in the early days as a continuous integration pipeline, we called it the continuous integration platform. But fundamentally what it is the entire end-to-end DevOps toolchain, right? Where from the time the developer has his code ready to be checked in, from that time on, it sort of tends to take over a lot of the activities that typically happen manually. So automating the build, taking the packages and integrating them automatically. Now after integration, once you have the package or the DLL ready, bringing in a bunch of checks, and these checks may be relevant for us. Some of them would apply for anybody, but we do what is relevant for us. So this could mean code analysis. This could mean obfuscation. If you are building a product, you would want to obfuscate your code, before you deliver to the customer. Functional tests, performance tests, open source compliance checks that we do in our product teams, and so on. So the whole 9 yards that you do on a product or on a project, the entire thing is automated. We use Jenkins, which is open source, as the central sort of orchestration engine here, and we have built a bunch of things on top of it to make this happen. Now the idea here really, as I said, was to make sure that this is one scriptless. So if you are a developer or a project team that is sort of onboarded on this, the only thing that you actually are required to do is to interact with it through a portal. You don't have to write a single line of script. You don't have to install a bunch of things. The only thing you do is provide the paths to your SCM repository, and then select a bunch of options. I want to do code analysis, I want code coverage also, I want this report, and here is where to send the report, and blah blah blah, and here is where I want you to go and dump the package. So once you give these details, the engine sort of kicks in from the back end and does everything for you. So as a developer, one, you are not writing scripts, you're not installing stuff, right? You're not worried about hardware and where do I run my builds and all of that. All of that is taken care by the platform. So there are a bunch of innovative things that happened, with the platform. So one, a lot of the DevOps related practices are at least not standardized. So you go to 3 different teams, you will find each one of them, one having a different definition of these, and second, each one of them actually implementing a varied set of practices. So with the platform, in some ways, we now have a completely standardized way of doing this. Second, this is completely automated. So like I said, this is scriptless, this is touchless. You interact through a web portal, which is pretty straightforward and easy. So completely automated. Integration. So because we have built a bunch of adapters in some ways to integrate, you can possibly integrate anything here. So this is what we have integrated right now. So a bunch of lifecycle tools, and the list keeps growing. So every other team would possibly want a new thing added here, and it becomes very easy because you have done one, you can then repeat the others without too much of an hassle. So the list of items that gets added keeps growing. Every month few get added here. The other thing is simplified. So DevOps and all of these continuous integration and continuous deployment and all of this, which sound very complicated to do, through the platform they are completely simplified, right? So any team which wants to get into a cadence of a 3-week, 4-week, 6-week review, 6-week releases, they can come on board and start doing it practically from day one, right? So that's the kind of benefits we have got through the platform. How did we select these, say Jenkins, for example, right? And I have listed a bunch of factors, but fundamentally our idea was to create something that we can give away, and give away in 2 senses. One, we wanted to give this away to customers who were willing to experiment in the early stages. So therefore we did not want something very commercial. So we wanted something that is open source and we can sort of give away without too much of an hassle. Second, the idea was to also give back to the community. So a bunch of things that we have done with Jenkins and other host of tools, we plan to give back to the community. So a lot of these in due course you will see getting plowed back to the community. So that's something that we will sort of commit back to the community as well. But fundamentally there are other factors also. At the time when we were actually looking at Jenkins, you had Maven and some of the others which were also in use. We selected Jenkins based on some of the factors listed here. One, we found a large community, so we felt that if we had issues, we had problems, we would have help and we could sort of fall back on that. Second, it sort of fit very well into our platform approach. So because it is at the center of everything that we do, we felt it sort of fits very well in the platform vision that we had. And also, over the past 3 years or so, it has sort of lived up to that in some ways, because we still continue to develop, we still continue to add more features to the platform. The other aspect was the ability to extend, the ability to create wrappers, extensions, bring in more tools, connect more ecosystems to it. And so this platform, which started out with continuous integration today, because of that extensibility, has really sort of fanned out into something much bigger and much complicated as well. I sort of spoke about this, so I'll just move on. This is a typical tool chain that we see in our company. Again, this is more dependent on the kind of work we do, but you will see a variety of this in your ecosystems. So this is what we have, right, largely. There are obviously more teams which are coming forward, so this list sort of continues to grow. This is what we support right now. There is a bunch of commercial tools, there is a bunch of open source, there are some homegrown tools as well which we continue to add. Case study, again, you look at case studies around DevOps, you will find big numbers, you will find 80% improvement and all of that. And personally, I find them a little funny because, if you are doing some, software development in any proper form, if you are suddenly seeing those kind of improvements, there is something really wrong, right? So obviously, I mean, I'm not seeing those kind of improvements. I'm seeing, 10s and 20% kind of improvements, and that too in very specific areas. And the reason for that, I'm assuming, is there was something in place already, right? You had a bunch of tools, you had already smart people doing something useful. So the numbers are fairly subdued. They are not something that will alarm you, but at the same time they are real. They are real improvements that you see on the ground. They are real improvements which your developers will actually sort of commit to and say, yes, I did see 10% improvement. I did see this kind of defects coming down. I did see that because I caught these things early, I was able to shrink my cycle time, right? So this is a case study for one of our product teams, which was an early adopter and continues to use the platform today. These are the kind of numbers they saw. So they, sort of looked at their end-to-end cycle time. That was about 20% what they got. The other thing, and which according to them, more than the cycle time, they felt quality was a bigger problem when they started adopting. And the defects going down, they could see that clearly reflecting in their appraisal cost. The review and the testing and all of those costs sort of came down by a significant amount. And that for them was a bigger win than the cycle time, because cycle time, they felt they had other strategies to really address, but this was a big thing. The quality part, the defects part was a big bonus for them. So this is a quick case study. I'll stop here. I know I have maybe a couple of questions. Yeah.
Any question from the audience? Questions? Please raise your hands.
I think that must be for lunch.
Okay, here. Can we have the mic here, please?
I have a question towards the platform that you were mentioning. Is this like an offering which other companies can use? Or how generic is it for them to use?
It is quite generic actually, and obviously, like I said, our customers get it right because of the engagement. Other companies, I mean, we are not selling this. We are not selling this as such as a product, but it's pretty straightforward. I mean, we built it, and I know you might find it odd, but we built it probably in 6 to 8 weeks time. The first version, of course, and then more things have got added to it in due course. But the first release, I think we did probably in like 6 to 8 weeks time, not more, for sure. So my suggestion is, don't try to buy these things. Try to build one yourself, and I can help, right, in whatever capacity. Like I said, I mean, we are going to open source a lot of these things. Of course, not the commercial stuff that you saw there, but whatever we have done with Jenkins, we are very keen that we give it back to the community. So you probably don't need a commercial solution in my view. There are commercial offerings. I mean, I can suggest some of them also later on. But try to see if you can use the basic Jenkins thing. And the reason I'm saying is because I don't think any team can, suddenly, sort of jump 5 steps and get to the highest level of maturity immediately. You would start at level 1 or level 2. So for that, you start and then you sort of evolve with the platform. So practices and platforms, both can sort of evolve hand in hand.
Thank you, Naresh.
We have a question there, the lady. Ma'am, mic, please.
Hi. Did you have any prerequisites for the code to be checked in, for this framework to be used? Because unless there is some kind of quality that is assured before the code is checked in, the framework is not going to be that useful. Did you have unit testing or any other kind of prerequisite that was required for the framework?
Yeah, good question, because I remember, sort of addressing a bunch of product owners to start with few years back, and when we were just about to sort of start the deployment. And, a couple of the gentlemen there had a lot of difficulty trying to understand why should a developer check in every day. Because they were coming from the old times, where, I mean, it was pretty strange for them, why the heck are you asking the developer to check in every day? And the point was, if he checks in every day and there will be mistakes and then the test will fail And I was telling them, that is exactly the idea. Let the test fail every day, right? So yes, we told the developers this is what will happen, but we expect the developers to check in every day, right? So every day, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whenever, right? As the check-ins happen, this triggers, and the whole process that I spoke about, getting the builds done, getting the integration done, creating the package, sending out those emails to the user saying, here is what failed, here is where it failed. So yes, I think the first few weeks are painful because people, sometimes are not very keen on seeing the mistakes that they have done, pointed out by somebody else. But the beauty here is that somebody is not a person, the somebody is a platform. And I think people begin to accept things much more easier from a tool or a platform than a user. Just think of it, right? I mean, somebody doing a code review and telling me, your code is bad. I think I would begin to take it personally at some point, saying, why the heck is this person telling me? But now you have a platform telling you, and you don't argue with the platform. You can't go and fight with ICIP. You can fight with a Naresh Chaudhary, you can fight with somebody else, right? But you can't fight with the platform. So I think in due course, those practices begin to sink in. But we did not really, we educated people that this is what will happen in the first few weeks. But I think after that, things sort of get streamlined. And developers begin to self-learn. I think, developers are pretty smart. Self-learn. I think within a couple of days, we'll find them, sort of following the best practices, doing things the right way. And you will find a lot of benefits out of this. This is also very transparent. And as developers, we are very egoistic, right? I don't want others, I want others to see the good side of my development, right? So when I check in my code, I want to make sure that I am doing the right stuff, and I'm sort of, well, now it is all public, right? You can see whose build, whose check-in, whose commit actually messed up the build and all of that.
Thank you.
All right, with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to thank AVP and Tools at Infosys, Mr. Naresh Chaudhary, with a bigger round of applause. Thank you so much. To present a memento to Mr. Chaudhary, I'd like to request Mr. Rodrigo Gonzalez, the CEO, Clariv Software, to kindly come on stage. Let's welcome the CEO of Clariv on stage, please. Thank you, Gonzalez. Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. Kindly take your seat.